Good morning, folks. Everything new under the sun. As we look to war in the world, as the Bible predicts in the last days, we look at the current situation of world powers, superpowers, and nations that want to be superpowers. And the nations that want to be top of the list are Russia and China. And so they're warring against the United States, and they have been for a long time, to become the next world superpower, to become or have the next world reserve currency in the yuan or the Russian ruble. China has been pushing to be the next world reserve currency. I don't think that's going to happen because I think the mark of the beast system is going to come after the US dollar ceases from being the world reserve currency. This article, however, apparently an intelligence source from the Pentagon, suggests that the US will be at war with Russia/China within 4 years. What I think is interesting is the timing. I believe that the U.S. will be taken out of world superpower status within probably the next 2 years. There's a reason they're not mentioned, or any Western power is really mentioned in Ezekiel 38:39 when Russia, with its allies, walks into Israel and causes Israel to be on its heels so much and to be pushed back so far that they have to call upon God to protect them. And God will show his power and protect them. And this is part of bringing the Jews back to God, the true God, and not doing their own religious thing, and to recognize Jesus Christ as the Messiah. They didn't recognize Jesus Christ as the Messiah when they crucified him, when we all crucified him, really, 2,000 years ago. And so there's coming a day when the Jews are put in such a situation where they're forced to call upon God, and God will show his power to the Jewish people, and that's happening in these last days. And so I think prior to that, Western powers have to be taken out of the situation, out of world superpower status, so that no Western nations are able or willing, apparently, to come and help Israel out when Magog happens, when Ezekiel 38 happens. So the timing of which is possibly at question. We don't know exactly when. But this apparent report from the Pentagon suggests it's going to be within 4 years. So this is from RussiaInsider.com. Bipartisan panel, U.S. must prepare for horrendous, devastating war with Russia and China. Apparently the bipartisan commission was appointed by the U.S. Congress, and they issued a report Tuesday backing the Pentagon's plan to prepare for a great power war against Russia, China, or both, making clear that the Trump administration belligerent policies are shared by the Democratic Party. It says, safe in the knowledge that its findings will never be seriously reported by mass media, and that's true because mass media doesn't want to stir up trouble. They know this could hurt the stock markets, and the mass media doesn't want to hurt stock markets. So they're not going to report on stuff that appears to be doom and gloom. A war between the U.S. and China, which according to the report might break out within 4 years, this is the article saying that, will be horrendous and devastating. Now, I think the timeline is shorter than that. I think there's going to be some significant either war or more likely, I think there's just going to be a war of economies, an economic war, an economic collapse, in fact, which causes all Western countries not to be able to do anything militarily, and leave only standing the countries that are ruled by dictatorships, like Russia, like China, that are ruled by military force, like some of the Middle East countries. It will only leave those standing, and all you need to do is pull the economic plug on the world, and basically all Western nations, first world Western nations, are hurt so much in famine, their people are starving, Mad Max-style chaos going on, that they will not be able to respond and support Israel in the last days, and God's setting it up that way so that he can show his power. He doesn't want the Western countries to come in and help Israel because he wants to be able to show Israel that he is their God. The military will face greater losses than at any time in decades. Such a war could lead to rapid nuclear escalation, and American civilians will be attacked and likely killed. These are the things that are reminiscent of what the Bible speaks of in the last days: violence, wars and rumors of wars, nation rising against nation in the last days. That's exactly what this Pentagon report is speaking of. It goes on and speaks about the political scandals, which are all a distraction from what's actually going on. Let's see. These people all accept as plain, self-evident facts. Statements, if they ever made the evening news, would be dismissed as conspiracy theories, speaking of the war, if it ever got into the mainstream media. The latest example of such plain speaking comes in the form of a new report published by the National Defense Strategy Commission, a body set up by Congress. The findings of the panel published a report titled Providing for the Common Defense. The U.S. military is entirely correct to prepare for war with Russia and China, but the Pentagon, which spends more each year than the next 8 largest national military forces combined, requires a massive expansion in military spending to be paid for with cuts to bedrock social programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Note that the Pentagon spends more each year than the 8 largest national militaries. What does Russia and China need to take the U.S. military out of action? It simply needs to cut its budget. How can Russia and China cut the military's budget? Well, by collapsing the U.S. economy and the Western global economy, effectively. That basically immediately puts a halt to military actions. They need money to keep going. If there is no money because an economic collapse occurs, then all Russia and China have to do is walk over everybody that they want to walk over, and especially go into Israel and do what the Bible prophecy says is coming up soon. In other words, a congressional rubber stamp on the Trump administration military bill, putting into words what the Congress did this year when it passed the overwhelming bipartisan support, the largest military budget increase since the Cold War. So if the U.S. continues to do this, of course, it'll stay as a world power. But money is quickly running out. The U.S. is $22 trillion in debt. It's probably more right now. So all Russia and China have to do is collapse the economy, and they're ready to do so. They're already trading between themselves, Russia and China, with their new payment system. They do not use U.S. dollars as their currency for trade anymore. Iran is getting away from it. Saudi Arabia is getting away from using U.S. dollars in trade between Middle East countries and others. And so all the nations of the world are moving away from the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency. All you need to do is one of these large countries, China, Russia, to pull the trigger jointly, pull the economic war trigger, and collapse United States society, Western nation society, economically, to where they're starving, to where there's martial law, to where there's looting and violence and famines and pestilences occurring, and mass chaos and civil war in these countries, to where the U.S. military would either be occupied internally or simply not have any money to actually go in and defend against China and Russia. So I think these are the current valid situations that are coming upon us. The recognition that the United States should prepare for an imminent whole-of-society war with devastating impacts on the American population. The document is a stark warning of another basic reality. The United States could very well lose such a war. This thing says the United States might struggle to win or perhaps lose a war against China or Russia. Remember, China and Russia are effectively military dictatorships driven by fear of the public. And so if the economy collapses, these countries would still have their military because they're ruled by fear and military. And the U.S., if the economy collapsed, those soldiers want to be paid, so they're not going to go to war if they're not getting paid. It goes on. It adds, should war occur, American forces will face harder fights and greater losses than at any time in other decades. The amount of destruction a major state adversary could inflict on the U.S. forces today might be orders of magnitude higher. So, in parallel with pulling the trigger of economic collapse, could be an EMP blast over the U.S., which would be the final blow, really. Not only collapsing the economy, but also taking out electronics to the point where absolutely the U.S. military would be completely overwhelmed with keeping peace and civility in their own country, let alone going to a larger war. And maybe that's why they don't back up Israel when Gog-Magog, Ezekiel 38 invasion occurs. It says, yet it would lose large numbers of ships and aircraft, as well as thousands of lives in an effort in addition to suffering severe economic disruptions, I believe the economic disruption is what triggers, is what is a precursor, is what is Russia and China does without actually shooting a bullet. That's what they cause, economic disruption, all with no guarantee of having divisive impact before Taiwan was overrun. The solution, the report concludes, is a much bigger army funded by consistent multi-year increases in spending, which means more debt, which means it's more potential that this can never occur and that the U.S. economy will collapse because they don't have any money. They're printing money out of thin air. As long as they're the world reserve currency, they can print money out of thin air. But as soon as nations get sick of that, Russia and China already are, then there will be no more money for the military. In fact, the military and the U.S. will be bankrupt, and that will take them out of world superpower status. That will cause them not to be able to support Israel. To pay for all this, social services will be gutted, all these unfunded liabilities. And finally, all society must be mobilized behind the war effort. That's if there's any money at this point in time to do this. So this is a huge, interesting article, apparently about a document from the Pentagon, something commissioned by Congress to present to them, to talk about what could be coming up, what are the next wars, and they believe this could happen in the next 4 years. The report, according to the report, this might break out within the next 4 years, and it will be horrendous and devastating. And that kind of does line up with my timeline of the end of the world, the start of the 7-year tribulation into the year 2021, the return of the Lord, some possibly a mid-trib, definitely before the year 2028, which I believe is the end of 6,000 years of man on this planet. We are living on borrowed time. We are in the last seconds of the last days. The Lord's returning soon, but hard times are coming. And this is one of these reports that suggests that you need to get ready. You need to know the Lord Jesus Christ as your personal Savior. He's coming soon. Be prepared, guys. We are getting so close.